What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 185. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. I'm joined by Connor Freeman today. He's doing some guest hosting. Very excited to have you here today, Connor. And
Great to
Connor
be
is
here.
a writer at the Libertarian Institute. And right now we have our fall fund drive going on at the Institute. We're about 75% of the way to the goal. And if you want to, Scott Horton, that is, has locked down matching funds. So anytime you donate, it gets doubled. And that'll get us all the way to our goal. There's great kit bats, books, and everything else that you could want. Libertarian Ron Paul coins and everything like that Scott has to offer. So libertarianinstitute.org. You find my work, you find Connor's work, Scott Horton, Pete Quinones, Sheldon Richmond, and a bunch of great writers and podcasters. Support what we're doing, and really appreciate when people could do that. You can also find the show at YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey for video versions. We have the show up on our social media accounts at Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. And you could donate directly to the show if you really want to do that at Patreon or Subscribestar or through crypto, and that information's in the show notes page. Another great way to help the show, and this one benefits you as well, and that is to do your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com has a great lineup of high quality CBD products. They include soft gels, extracts, and my personal favorite, the topicals. Their sports cream works fantastic. It lasts a long time. Has a great menthol smell. Whatever you got going on, there's something at Paloma Verde that could help you. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. That saves you 25% off. That gets the show a kickback. Connor, let's get into the show today. And the first story we have up here is the assassination attempt on the Iraqi president. So I just want to kind of get into what's been unfolding in Iraq in the past couple of weeks. In October, there was an election in Iraq that was where the in Iraq, there's never like one party that's going to win a majority. It's not like Republicans versus Democrats. There's Sunni parties, there's Kurdish parties, and there's a variety of Shia parties. And they include parties that represent the Shia militias, the Popular Mobilization Forces, Hush Tashabi is another way to refer to those groups. And then there's more of like a Shia populist bloc, maybe to call it, led by Motada al-Sadr. And they're the Sadrist. And so I believe they won the most seats in the last election, but this election they did even better, winning a plurality of seats. But a lot of those seats came from the seats that would have been won by the Shia militias. And so for the past couple weeks, Sadr has been trying to form a coalition, and it's been met with protest, particularly from the parties that represent the Shia militias, feeling like they got unfairly treated either through fraud or something in the recent elections in Iraq. I actually have no idea if the results are fraudulent or more fraudulent than normal or anything like that, Connor. But that's what that party is claiming, that, and of course the Sadrists are fine with the results. They're very happy with it. Although, as Jason Ditz wrote last week at antiwar.com, they're not having a very easy time building any kind of ruling government. This is a parliamentary system. So what happens is people are voting for a party, I think, most of the time. Then people from that party's list are put in the parliamentary positions, and then they make a list of positions, so prime minister, foreign minister, defense minister, etc. And then all those people get voted on in one big group, and if it gets approval from a majority of the parliament, then that becomes the ruling government of Iraq, right? And so it's been very hard to form a government for them essentially the entire time that's existed. The U.S. has tried to take what was Saddam's Iraq, that was a dictatorship, and turn it into a democracy. It's always been an absolute calamity. So in Iraq, the main power does lie with the prime minister, not the president, although there usually is a president. So if you hear something like the Iraqi president does this, that's a far less important position. I think a position that by law is actually held by a Kurd, and where then the speaker of the parliament would be a Sunni, and the leader of the government would be a Shia. So Sadr's trying to form a coalition. It's not going well. The militias are claiming election fraud. And then recently, Connor, we had 3 people killed in a protest. It was a pro-militia protest in Baghdad, and then they were killed by Iraqi security forces. And so this kind of shows that even though the Iraqi security forces are Shia, the Iraqi government is Shia, these militias are Shia, the Sadrists are Shia, it doesn't mean that, oh, look, they're all the same, right? It would be just as stupid as saying, well, the American Christians all agree on blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work that way. They have a wildly different views, especially political views. And so, at this protest, 3 are killed. And then the leader of the Shia militias in Iraq did say that there would be a response to the protest killings. Now, after that, we had 3 drones launched at the residence of the Iraqi prime minister. 2 of those drones were in some way either intercepted, downed, or just didn't reach their target. But according to the Iraqi government, they were downed. And the home of the prime minister, Mustafa al-Kadhimi, was hit with one of the drones. Now, Connor, I haven't seen, I guess, an actual picture or any kind of evidence that makes me know the exact size of this drone. It seems like it was a suicide type drone with like an explosive maybe around the size of a grenade attached to this. So it's not like somebody took a Predator drone and stuck a Hellfire missile on it and sent that through the president's window or something, or the prime minister's window. I just want to make it kind of clear. If people, when I saw it looked like, some minor explosion had happened just outside of the building. It didn't look like that big of an attack. It's not like a wall was collapsed or anything like that. Just trying to give as much detail as possible because I know most people are listening and not watching, and I don't have a picture up here anyways. But go ahead, Connor.
I was just gonna say the pictures I saw were like, it looked like a door had been blown off. So it's like, that level of an explosion. And it didn't collapse any building structures, but that kind of a thing.
And at least as far as I'm aware, Connor, nobody was killed in this attack. 7, just 7 were injured. They were members of the Iraqi security forces. It wasn't exactly clear to me if that, these were people that were maybe outside of the palace, the residents that were maybe hit with the drones that were down beforehand, or if they were actually people inside or just outside who were hit with the drone that actually hit the house. They say the president the prime minister, was not injured in the attack. However, who knows? I really don't trust a whole lot of the reporting coming out of the Iraqi government on this. If they feel the need to, present as secure and that we completely foiled this attack, I see it as, possible that they would downplay it. Or if they want to make the president look a little bit more like a hero, maybe they play it up a little bit. There's a lot of possibilities of what's going on here. No group has claimed responsibility for this attack. And when we look at who it could have possibly been, the Shia militias, they should, I think, be at the top of the list of suspects. It seems like it could just be a coincidence, or it could be directed retaliation that 3 people were killed and 3 drones were used. Now, I believe the leader of the Shia militias denied it and said something along the lines of, we wouldn't bother wasting the drones, although I'm not sure how much of a denial that is. As far as it goes, there's the Islamic State that operates in Iraq who would want to do this. There's Shia and Kurds with legitimate grievances. I don't think that, there's a lot of people people in Iraq who are suffering right now. And so if this was just some group of people who carried out assassination, absolutely possible. Is it even possible that maybe it was the Iraqi government that did this essentially in order to, drum up more support or look, like, you could generate states of emergency with these kind of actions, right? You could become more authoritarian. False flags happen. Not saying that's what happened here, but we really don't know. And so that's why I want to break down Connor. I think that's all I really know, all we really have on it. I'm sure more is going to unfold, but one of the things I did want to mention is this is the reason why on the show I have talked about the pressure that the U.S. has been putting on the Iraqi government to put more pressure to demilitarize the Iraqi Shia militias, and how this could eventually come to a head between the Iraqi government and the Shia militias, and that's possibly what we're seeing right here.
Yeah, I saw that Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UN, and the Americans have come out and condemned the attack. I think the Americans called it an act of terrorism against the Iraqi state. And yeah, to highlight what you were saying about how it's a lot of these details are ambiguous still. Yeah, I saw differing things about like where they some of the reports are saying like in Middle East Eye, I think that they were saying that he was not even at his residence inside the green zone, that he was at some remote location. And also they keep revising the numbers and changing them where it'll say 7 guards were wounded. Then they changed it to 6. And then another report I saw, I think that came out more recently, said that 2 bodyguards had been injured. And I will just correct myself. I went back and looked at the page. It does look like there was damage to some walls and some like some concrete, like some structure had come down, but it was, I guess what I meant was like it's not like a building was destroyed or anything like that,
or a wall even, or anything like that. It was, I would call it minor damage.
Right.
They're bringing contractor in to clean this thing up. It's not like they have to have a whole demo team knock down like the front of the house to rebuild it or something.
And one of the Shia militia groups did say that I was quoting earlier before we started the show, the Coordination Committee of the Iraqi resistance factions said they labeled the attack a targeting of the Iraqi state, but also claimed it was fabricated by its enemies in an attempt to conflate the raid with the killing of its supporters in the Friday protest. And they said creating an incident like this will not prevent us from insisting on punishing the perpetrators, especially those involved with the bloodshed of innocent, peaceful demonstrators. So
and so that's a great point in all that, Connor, is in Iraq in the past, and I think actually last year around this time, or maybe it was 2 years ago, in November in Iraq, there were major protests where hundreds of people were killed. And so, this sort of thing could spark off something bigger. And it certainly seems that, at least in the international media, I'm guessing in Iraq too, an attempted assassination, at least allegedly, on the life of a president gets the headlines off of anything else. There's one more story in Iraq I want to mention before we move on. And I think this is pretty important, maybe even more important in some ways. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S.-led coalition says Iraq military still needs U.S. support. Now, this does come from the Office of Operation Inherent Resolve, and so this is the military mission to Afghanistan, the anti-ISIS coalition. And so they are saying that, hey, look, we're still relevant and still needed in a way. And that is a way to look at it, like a government bureaucracy. It doesn't want to close its doors. It wants to find something to do. And so saying the Iraqi military still needs them to fight ISIS gives them something to do. At the same time, I don't know how to interpret this other than the military admitting one of the biggest, most massive, unbelievable failures you could ever have, right? It's been, 15 years since they formed the Iraqi military, and it can't even fight off an insurgency within its own country? What the hell good is this thing that we keep giving billions of dollars a year then? It seems like, I don't know if you maybe have a little different take on this, Connor, But it seems that this isn't a mission of failure, but rather it's used by the Hawks in the United States to further this group's mission when clearly it can't succeed. Now, the other thing to mention is we are coming up, a month and a half now, where Biden says that we should be switching or changing the U.S. mission in Iraq from a combat one to like a training and assisting one, which I think is absolutely meaningless changes in definition. However, if you are like, if your job is dependent on, your post is dependent on, having this Operation Inherent Resolve existing, if you're the commander of that, if that post dissolves, like, you might be doing something less important. You may be getting kind of effectively a demotion. Um, you could, you see the writing on the wall maybe with the name of the mission changing, and so that prompts you to put out ridiculous statements like this, saying what the Iraqi military, after the U.S. has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on it, really can't deal with ISIS within its own borders. This is crazy.
And this is like, it's hard to overestimate how diminished of a compared to like the ISIS that we were introduced, everybody was, the theatrical ISIS of 4 years ago or 5 years ago, from 2014 to 2017, when they really did control territory the size of Great Britain in eastern Syria and western Iraq, which again was a result of the U.S. intervention. But so much of this too, and you're right, absolutely, is such a total failure and embarrassing admission, but that doesn't seem to stop them anywhere else. So much of this, as we've covered on the show, is about checking Iran. I mean, as you were covering recently, the position at Al-Tanf is directly on that Baghdad-Damascus highway, trying to block, whatever arms shipments from Iran all the way to Hezbollah. And so, there's so many moving parts involved, but yeah, it's interesting that they can just admit that, like, ISIS attacks are down 86% in Syria and 20% in Iraq, but this is an indefinite presence, and we know, as Biden already came out, like you said, it's this is it's not even really a cosmetic change. They're just changing the wording of it, and essentially nothing else is changing about the presence in Iraq. But that may be changing now that Sadr, if they can get it together and get closer to, putting a government together and picking a new prime minister with Kadhimi on his way out, that calculus may change here pretty soon.
All right, Connor, let's move on and talk about the Saudis. Mohammed bin Salman is the kind of de facto leader there. And for all the outrage that we heard in the early days of the Biden administration, even during the Biden campaign, about how terrible this guy is, murdering Jamal Khashoggi and all that, doesn't seem like we're getting much of a change with U.S.-Saudi policy during the Biden administration. And just, taking more steps down that path, continuing to support the war in Yemen. I know we got a lot of news here, Connor, so go ahead, just update us what's going on with the Saudis.
Sure. We'll start with, so Dave DeCamp has a report at antiwar.com about the Biden administration approves a $650 million missile sale to Saudi Arabia. So let's see, this is from November 4th. So the Pentagon announced that the State Department, this is last week, has approved a potential sale of missiles to Saudi Arabia that they requested. So they're getting 280, or at least the sale's been approved. It's 280 AIM-120C air-to-air missiles and 596 LAU-128 missile rail launchers, as well as they're also getting, to go along with this package, spare parts, other support and logistical services as well. And so those missiles are going to be fit to the Eurofighter Typhoons and American F-15s. And of course, Saudi Arabia is still, the blockade has not been lifted. They're still bombing the hell out of Yemen currently, especially around Maarib, which is really the last city that the Hadi government has any control over in northern Yemen, although the Houthis are closing in on that city and are presumably going to be laying siege to it here pretty soon, or at least that's what it's looking like. And in the meantime, there have just been, extremely high death tolls, usually well over 100 every day. it seems like the last several months, but certainly in the last couple of months. And that city's been contested essentially since February of this year. But anyway, so yeah, this is totally contradictory to Biden's original position, which I wrote an article about back in February, where he initially had come out and said that I'm going to end all offensive operations and all relevant arms sales. And so they did temporarily pause sales that were that were made under the Trump administration that were still pending, I believe, to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And the sale to the UAE was a part of the normalization deal, sort of the phony, stage
Abraham
managed.
Accords.
Yeah, exactly, with the UAE, and they were getting F-35s, Reaper drones, and I think something like 14,000 munitions as well. And so at first it looked like Biden was, as you said, they always make a huge deal out of Khashoggi, which frankly always kind of bugs me because they've killed conservatively. This is an old estimate. An old conservative estimate says that they've already killed a 250,000 people in Yemen. And so, but Biden was saying on the campaign trail, I'm going to treat Saudi Arabia like the pariah nation that it is. Or he may have said that about Mohammed bin Salman, but the point is the same. And but no, I mean, actually, so it was revealed in late April. I believe it was Alex Ward at Fox who did the reporting where he spoke to Pentagon officials, and it came out that under the Foreign Military Sales Program, America is still servicing Saudi warplanes that are bombing Yemen. And which means under that program, the Saudi Arabia pays the U.S. to provide contractors to maintain their airplanes. And so so that's obviously an offensive operation. In fact, he interviewed John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman back then, who said, he asked him, is this a defensive? Can these, planes be used for defensive and offensive operations? And he said, well, yes, they can be used for both. And then I believe in September, it came out that they were maintaining. We also had another $500 million contract to maintain Saudi helicopters, Apache helicopters, Black Hawk attack helicopters. And so at this point now, this is, the second contract, and just under Biden in this first year, we have, if this goes through, that's over $1 billion in essentially military contracts with Saudi Arabia for the express purpose of, pursuing this almost 7-year-old failed barbaric genocidal war in Yemen, which is of course illegal, and there have been War Powers Act resolutions that were vetoed by Trump. Ro Khanna recently proposed actually they got passed into the House version of the NDAA, but it's being stalled in the Senate, where they are trying to end logistical support and weapons provisions to Saudi Arabia. So hopefully that will go through. But at the same time, this is, I'll have to add as well, this is the primary contractor for this sale is Raytheon, which of course is the former home of Lloyd Austin and also our new Air Force Secretary. But Lloyd Austin, after he left his position as the head of CENTCOM, he retired to the board of Raytheon and then became the War Secretary. So I'll point out here that the State Department, in their PR for this, they're framing it as they're helping Saudi Arabia defend themselves against essentially against Iranian asymmetrical attacks. Basically conflate the old story of conflating the Houthis with Iran when there's no evidence, and Gareth Porter debunked this stuff years ago, that they're getting weapons through the blockade. And of course, Yemen doesn't really need that. They've been exporting weapons during the war. They're flush with weapons, especially over the many years of the U.S. providing them with weapons back when Saleh was in power, especially. So anyway, the State Department said that, let's see, so they pointed to an increase in cross-border attacks against Saudi Arabia in the last year, and these air-to-air missiles are supposed to intercept those attacks. They've called the sale fully consistent with the administration's pledge to lead with diplomacy to end the conflict in Yemen, while ensuring Saudi Arabia has the means to defend itself from Iran-backed Houthi air attacks. And they point to, or the Saudis, as they mention here in this article, have blamed these attacks. Well, they say these attacks have hit their airports and their oil facilities, which, as we know, but it's often framed in the media and by the U.S. as these are Iranian attacks. Some people are saying, sort of interpreting this as the U.S. trying to ease some of the anxiety Saudi may be feeling as U.S. approaches back into nuclear talks with gets back into nuclear talks with Iran. Although I seem to think, based on, we're going to talk about this article from Ted Snyder here in a moment, I think it's possible that this is also about more or less keeping Saudi Arabia in check as they actually tilt toward Iran in so many ways, and also to Russia and China. Because as we've been discussing here on the last couple of episodes we've done, that there really is kind of a sea change going on in the Middle East, where Israel is still trying to get America to possibly fight a war with Iran, or at least stay out of the Iran deal and stay bogged down in the Middle East and never leave Iraq and Syria. But these states like Saudi Arabia, who we assume it was like this, perpetual conflict, Sunni Shia, they'll never work it out. They are actually now really warming ties. They just began Iran just began or restarted exports to Saudi Arabia. There's even talks about Saudi Arabia and Iran reopening their consulates in each other's respective countries. And some other things as well. There's even reports that have come out that are suggesting that there may even be something set up, a kind of a mechanism where Saudi Arabia would help Iran sell oil and get around the U.S. Sanctions. And there's more to that, but I'll just say that this Ted Snyder piece, he actually interviews Anel Shalin from the Quincy Institute, who has written quite a bit about this recently. And she says that she cites the reasons for this. She says, he says she suggests that Saudi Arabia's moves to reducing tensions with Iran reflects their new despair of the U.S. either prioritizing Saudi preferences or being willing to act as a guarantor of Saudi Arabia's security. And as for the reasons for this, she says, quote, from Obama's signing of the JCPOA to Trump's lack of response after the September 2019 attacks on Saudi oil facilities to Biden pulling out of Afghanistan, the past 3 U.S. administrations have alarmed Saudi rulers. And so he gets into how, starting in 2020, Saudi and Iran began talking because it appeared that Trump was not going to attack Iran and go to war with them, which they would have been happy to, facilitate or, help push America into that war. But when it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen, they actually started talking with their longtime rival. In fact, famously, General Qasem Soleimani was on a diplomatic mission to Iraq when he was assassinated at Baghdad International Airport. And so he was bringing, a response from Iran back to peace overtures made by Saudi Arabia by way of Iraq. And Iraq has been facilitating these talks the whole time. So he talks about how, like I said, they've restarted. Iran has restarted exports to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, has called trade talks between the two cordial. And if the negotiations are successful, Iran is saying there could be a special development in exports to Saudi Arabia. And as I said, they're working out something where basically Iran could sell Saudi Arabia oil at lower prices, basically at lower prices, and then have Saudi Arabia sell. Actually, one second, let me grab the article here so I don't misquote this.
Yeah, and I mean, I do know that there's a lot of people who have put out that Saudi Arabia maybe doesn't have the promised oil reserves that they say they do, or something like that. And so or for whatever reason, have had trouble accessing or processing some of their oil. And so, maybe taking in this Iranian oil gives the Saudis an economic boost as well.
Yeah, it says the Iranians call on the Saudis to help them sell their oil once again. This is an Iraqi, according to this is a report from Middle East Eye, where they weren't talking to Iranians or Saudis, but they interviewed some Iraqi officials who are anonymous, but I think it's relevant. Ted cited it in the piece. It says, according to a senior Iraqi official close to Iran and familiar with the progress of the negotiations, quote, they offered to sell it to the Saudis at a price lower than international prices on the condition that the Saudis sell it on the world markets in their own way. He says the article says Iran currently relies mainly on the United Arab Emirates and Oman to sell its oil informally and needs another regional outlet to bypass the U.S. imposed blockade. Saudi appears to be an ideal option for them right now. And I thought it was interesting because this piece is from May, which on the bombshell report from Trita Parsi that came out a few weeks ago about how Biden, during the indirect talks in Vienna, his negotiating team, indirectly talking with the Iranians, made it clear, according to Trita's sources, Iranian and European diplomats, that the Biden administration cannot guarantee that they will stay in the deal, even assuming an initial U.S. return at least and Iranian full compliance with the JCPOA. So it seems like around that same time they were having these talks mediated by the Iraqis where they were going over basically Saudi would like to see them. They mostly were talking about the war in Yemen, and they would like to see sort of a camp tamping down a bit on the axis of resistance factions and what they call incitement against Saudi Arabia from those institutions. And the Iranians said, we'd like to be able to sell oil with you. And also, we believe that they were saying that we believe that the Houthis should have a sort of a partnership role with the Yemeni government. They should be partners in governance, is what the sources were saying here in this article. And then the Saudis said that they would like to see greater participation of Sunnis in Iraqi government institutions in a way that better reflects their population in the country, and the end of attacks by Iraqi factions on Saudi allies' potential investments inside Iraq, which I don't know about the second part, but the idea of having the Sunnis getting more representation, that may happen anyway, particularly if Sadr, if Sadr is able to put a government together because he's an Iraqi nationalist and is not as averse to having the Sunnis, playing a role in the government as some of the Shia factions that the Americans empowered in Iraq War II have been. So I'll just say, as far as that arms sale goes, the likelihood of that changing, it seems like there's less than a month of time, and there's a lot of legislation going on right now with Biden's domestic agenda, the NDAA, and the Build Back Better program. So it doesn't appear that will be able to be thwarted. They would need to get enough votes and then enough of a majority to overcome any kind of a presidential veto. So the prospects for that don't look so great. On the other hand, I was saying that this may be a reason why the Americans are interested in regaining the trust maybe of the Saudis. As Ted explains in this piece, and as Anel Shalin says, that as China and Russia gain more prominence in the region, Saudi Arabia has an interest in having, and these other states have interest in maintaining good relationships with Iran because they have great, very strong relationships with with Russia and China. So he talks about how they've joined as dialogue partners along with Qatar and Egypt, actually, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And Iran has been brought on as a full-fledged member into that group. And what I thought was really interesting, and I'll just quote him here, he says, Saudi Arabia has also made significant moves toward both China and Russia bilaterally. Saudi Arabia's moves toward China are diplomatic and economic. Saudi Arabia has been a priority in China's Middle Eastern diplomacy, according to Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Yi expressed a willingness to be Saudi Arabia's long-term, reliable, and stable good friend and partner, and strikingly characterized the China-Saudi Arabia relationship as a comprehensive strategic partnership. And he says, in a statement that will alarm the U.S., China promised to actively participate in Saudi Arabia's major development projects and further synergize Saudi Arabia into the Belt and Road Initiative. The Saudi foreign minister called China a truly credible strategic partner. And then the last thing is he says that the ties that they're building with Russia are more military. Back in August, Saudi Arabia signed an agreement with Russia to develop joint military cooperation. So all these things are notable, especially, that move toward Russia on the military side. it's interesting because America has recently been pulled, virtually all the missile defenses that America had in Saudi Arabia out, the Patriot missile batteries, for instance. So, it's interesting to see all these these sort of overtures between Saudi, and they're sort of moving away from the American-Israeli axis toward a more multipolar situation here as Russia and China become, more involved in the Middle East, and America seems to be tilting more towards Asia for the China, I should say, for the Asia pivot.
Now, I will say, and I think I tend to side more with Ted's side on all of this. I've seen two articles in the past couple weeks. One from Middle East Eye, written by somebody from FDD, and then I think another one from like military.com, actually arguing that Saudi Arabia was shifting more towards Israel. And so, while I guess I think it's a possibility that Saudi Arabia, as the U.S. policy develops, will either decide to seek diplomacy with Iran, or will like fall more along the UAE lines and the Abraham Accords and look to get something from the U.S. for normalizing relations with Israel. But all that remains to be seen. Connor, let's move on and talk about this really interesting story that Doug Bandow has wrote on, and honestly has not been covered nearly enough in the mainstream media. It seems to be a pretty substantial move. The Saudis have evicted the Lebanese diplomats and have banned Lebanese imports. And I think the UAE and Bahrain followed suit on this. All over, the Lebanese information minister basically kind of saying a vanilla-ish version of what me and you would summarize the war on Yemen as. So, Connor, what's going on with this?
Yeah. So, the guy's name is George Kordahi. I think I'm pronouncing that
That's the
approximately
Lebanese
close.
information minister.
Yes. And MBS or Riyadh anyway, described these as insulting remarks. And as you said, they've expelled the Lebanese ambassador and they've cut trade, and the UAE and Bahrain have as well now. So it was before his appointment to this position as information minister. He talked about how the Houthis are, quote, defending themselves against an external aggression. As you said, quite vanilla and really, that's almost neutral. There's not much to debate about that at all. But he says he observed that homes, villages, funerals, and weddings were being bombed by the coalition, the Saudi Emirati coalition. He said, Doug says that this would be the most painful to these war criminal states. He said that the war which is approaching its seventh year, is futile, and that it's time for it to end. And as Doug says, with the Emiratis disengaging and the Saudis losing. So, of course, and he points out that he didn't really say anything about the U.S. And their involvement, providing military support, diplomatic support, intelligence support, a logistical support as well, even for a time, refueling the Saudi warplanes bombing Yemen. But he also talks about how, Bahrain is probably upset as well because they've been involved in this war from the beginning, not nearly as much as the Saudis and the UAEs, but they were a part of the coalition, especially at the beginning. And as he said, and there's other governments as well. He mentions that Sudan has been providing mercenaries as well, do the actual fighting, which, of course, are in the Abraham's Accords and that same sort of axis we were just talking about. Doug's piece, he basically suggests that Lebanon should stand firm. The prime minister invited Kordahi to resign, which the George Kordahi, the information, he's refused to. He won't do it. He talks about how Lebanon is in a severe economic crisis right now, and there's significant civil unrest. We've seen some shooting in the streets over the last several weeks. and the political system seems to be breaking down here. Obviously, we've talked about it before. There've been massive oil shortages. People can't drive, having difficulty heating their homes. But as he said, Riyadh has long played a malign role, backing Sunni forces in a destructive sectarian system in which, as he says, in which political offices and economic benefits are divided among religious movements and political factions. And I believe, if you go back and look at, as Scott Horton always refers to, Cy Hirsch's piece, The Redirection, they were even backing bin Ladenite style groups, like Ansar al-Islam, I believe, in Lebanon.
And
And so,
to go maybe even more current, we're only like 4 years off of the when Lebanon's Prime Minister Saad Hariri traveled to Saudi Arabia. He was then
yeah,
forced to sit on TV, read his own resignation, and if it wasn't for the French president basically extending an invite and saying that, look, if anybody interferes with him going from Saudi Arabia to France, you're going to have problems with France. I don't know if he would have ever left France or Saudi Arabia alive. And so there is a lot of Saudi involvement in Lebanon. And look, even if you want to dispute kind of the narrative I put forward there, I'm sure there's a lot of Lebanese who kind of definitely feel the narrative I put forward is true, and just realize that that's going to create a lot of anti-Saudi sentiment within Lebanon, I think.
oh, sure, absolutely. And he also mentions that, he says that, as we were discussing earlier, these talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia, um, Doug says that rather than allowing the Lebanese to be bought and intimidated, Lebanon and the other Arab states should insist that the Saudis and Emiratis engage in a sustained dialogue with Tehran. And he talks about, like I was just saying, about how when they realized that Trump wasn't going to go to war with Iran, they started to begin those talks. So he says that should be more encouraged, that regional states don't want to have to choose between Saudi Arabia and Iran in a way analogous to how, the countries of the world don't want to have to choose between the Americans and China and the Americans and their allies, and China and their allies. So in this new Cold War. So, um, yeah, it's just, he goes through the litany of interventions that Saudi Arabia has done, not just in Lebanon, but of course backing the military coup in Egypt, and repressing the Shiite majority in Bahrain with money and troops, and so yeah, it's and of course backing Al Qaeda forces in Libya and Syria as well, with the Americans. So it's quite interesting, and yeah, it's just it's sort of reminds me of what happened with Qatar a few years ago, and that blockade was only recently lifted, where it just some of this stuff seems so petty, but Saudi Arabia makes a decision, and then these other states usually get behind them. It seems like when they pick, the fact that they all just cut trade with Lebanon like that is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways this is pretty telling on what the human rights position of all these countries really is, where you have like this is something that could have been ignored, and in fact we would have never talked about the random statement from the Lebanese foreign minister
Yeah.
or information minister on Yemen ever. Now maybe in the Middle East, like there would have been some coverage of it and stuff like that, but not nearly as much as the amount of attention and focus that's been placed on it because of the Saudi overreaction to it. So Connor,
Especially
and
when it was before his appointment too. Like, why are you even bringing this up now?
right,
Uh
yeah, it may not have been news for anyone then.
yeah.
Right, be everybody just forgot about it. But is there anything else on this particular story before we talk a little bit about the conflict going on in Yemen?
I think that's most of what I've got here for the moment on Lebanon. As far as I know, they've cut trade, the UAE and Bahrain as well, and we'll have to see where it goes from there. That's really bad, especially considering the situation Lebanon is in right now.
Yeah. All right, Connor. So I just want to do a little catch up on what's happening in Yemen. from the best I could tell. So for anybody who's looking at the map I have up here, I think the Houthis have gained a little bit more territory towards the city of Maarib than is indicated here. But for most of the audience just listening, the Houthis continue to control Sana'a, from the Saudi border, and even carrying out cross-border operations and holding some territory in like the very south of Saudi Arabia, all the way down the coastline. They still hold Hodeidah, and as far as I could tell, that the fighting for that city hasn't flared up. And then if you go down to the city of Taiz, it's I think the fourth most populous city in Yemen. That's been a pretty consistent battle line since 2015, and the battle lines don't seem to have changed there either. The main fighting going on between the Houthis and the Saudi-backed government has been from what they call a central Yemeni city, but if anybody's looking, it's actually probably more like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way towards the west of Yemen, but in the central, central north to south. And this is an area known to be more lucrative in like gas and other reserves, hydrocarbon reserves, and stuff like that. And it is, from what I understand, the last population center in what was historically pre 1990 North Yemen that isn't controlled by the Houthis. And so the Houthis have made advances on this city really over the course of this entire year, if not before. But the fighting has really picked up in the last 2 to 3 months. At least if you're going by the Saudi reports, they claim they're killing hundreds of Houthi every day, if not 2 or 3 days a week. They're saying over the last 48 hours we killed 100 number of Houthi fighters. If you add it all up over the past couple of months, it's well into the thousands. I'm very suspicious of it. I mean, it's possible that as the Houthis are sending reinforcements from Sana'a to Maarib, they're just being picked off consistently by the Saudis. But to say that you're killing thousands of fighters and absolutely no civilians sounds very inconsistent in what's happened with the rest of the war in Yemen. So I have a lot of questions about all the details of the fighting for Maarib, but this is a city that apparently, or an area, because it's a city, but outlying areas and everything else, that does have millions of people in it. Apparently, as people have been forced out of other areas of Yemen, they've ended up in Maarib, and now they're having to flee there. So there's a big humanitarian crisis coming from this. I assume as the Houthis push into the city, there's going to be more civilians being killed, more civilians being put into harm's way, not only by Houthi actions, but also by Saudi airstrikes. I also read at least 2 times in the past, I would say 2 months, the Houthis have been accused, and I'm sure credibly so, of carrying out different kinds of missile strikes against Saudi forces in this area, and claims that they've killed civilians, at least in part, in these strikes. I'm not sure about all who's dying, but I do believe the Houthis are carrying out those kind of strikes. And with the guidance systems on their missiles, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to understand that, or hear that they're hitting non-combatant targets with those missiles, either intentionally or not. But the Saudis have definitely ramped up the bombing in the area over the past couple of months. Now, there is also a situation in the south of Yemen, which this is the area that's, at least on international maps, labeled controlled by the U.S. Saudi Bat coalition, right? This is aid and all that. Although for the essentially the whole war, there's been another group in southern Yemen that gets more support from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and this is the Southern Transitional Council, or the STC. And from the best I could tell, they kind of say, well, look, the Houthis have the north. We really don't care. We'd rather be South Yemen again. And so they're competing with the kind of Saudi forces for that. And it seems that this relationship ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it seems they're working together, other times there's suicide bombings going off in southern Yemen, and there's conflict and the actual strife and killing between these two groups. And it seems we're more towards a strife time, with the STC recently pushing back and saying that the Saudis aren't living up to their agreements and everything like that. And then one thing I haven't been able to get a whole lot of really good details on, but I think is important, and I want to just mention the island of Skorhoda, which is off the southern coast of Yemen. It's known as the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean. It's like a very diverse ecosystem, and all this is traditionally a Yemeni island. Although, if you look at a map, it's kind of between Yemen and Somalia. But anyways, this has been a Yemeni island forever. The people who live there, I think, consider themselves Yemenis. But the UAE is really trying to move in on that. And I've read recently they've been ramping up their development on the island, potentially damaging some of the natural resources there, the unique diversity that's present on that island, to build economic or military positions. And so that's quite substantial, and another major casualty of this war will be the island. Now, before we stop talking about Yemen here, Connor, I just want to put out that we are now in November 8th, 2021. At the beginning of 2021, the UN warned that if something didn't happen, 400,000 Yemeni children would starve to death in this year. At the beginning of the year, I don't know. I really didn't think that we would get to the end of the year and I would be sitting here saying, well, we did nothing, so maybe the UN numbers will bear out true. Now, again, this is a UN estimate. Doesn't mean that they're right. They could be, 100,000 off, right? They could be 200,000 off. And it's still absolutely disgusting, horrific that like 200,000 Yemeni children were starved to death this year in a war that the U.S. didn't have to fight, that there's no geopolitical game for the United States to be involved in this, and yet we supported it the whole time. And in November we're doubling down with missile sales to Saudi Arabia. So, Connor, anything I missed on Yemen? Anything you want to touch on?
I'll just point out for the as far as the humanitarian situation goes, Doug cites some more recent information from particularly the UN in his piece, and he says UNICEF's Henrietta Fore in a UN briefing recently said 2.6 million children are now internally displaced, deprived of health care, education, sanitation, and safe water. Yemen's gross domestic product has dropped 40% since 2015. 21 million people, including 11 children, require humanitarian aid. 20 million lack access to health services. And Martin Griffiths, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, warned 5 million people are one step away from succumbing to famine and the diseases that go with it, and 10 million more are right behind them. And Doug mentions that, the old number, like I said, is an old conservative estimate that roughly 250,000 people have died. He says some from military action, 2/3 to 3/4 of the casualties and destruction attributable to the U.S.-backed coalition. Most of the civilians succumbed to indirect causes, widespread disease, malnutrition, and starvation as a result of just the constant bombing of civilian infrastructure, everything under the sun you can imagine, from flocks of sheep to hospitals to food warehouses to farms to bridges, roads, waterworks, sewage, and of course the blockade on top of it. It is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and has been for years and years.
Yep.
The worst thing on a long list of things, the worst thing the U.S. government is doing right now.
Well, it started off as Obama's war. It certainly was Trump's war for 4 years. And now that we're 10 months into this and Biden hasn't done a damn thing to change it, I think we could officially label this genocide over Biden's name too. Connor, before we wrap up here, the U.S. is planning another weapons sale. This one got to go to a different region of the world. It's not just we got build up against in the Middle East. We got build up against China and the South China Sea and Taiwan. But we also got some weapons sales going on in East Europe. So what's happening here, Connor?
Right. So this is from Daniel Larison. He was commenting on a piece from Tom Cotton, the American senator, neoconservative spokesman, who is talking about, you covered on the most recent show the buildup in, the alleged Russian military buildup near Ukraine, which apparently is like 100 miles closer to Belarus than it is to Ukraine. It's halfway between Moscow and Minsk in a place called Yelnya, which is it's as Moon of Alabama says here, it's a regular Russian army training ground. The troops are said to be there. Let's see, what does he say? All units of Russia's Western Military District. To see troops there, even in large formations, is normal. So, but the Americans are running with this, and of course, Tom Cotton is using it as an excuse to sanction. He wants to sanction Nord Stream 2 again. He wants to send more missiles to Ukraine. I actually printed out his article is horrible, but there's a line in here that you'll get a kick out of just because it was written by Raytheon. He goes, first, increase and expedite shipments of lethal defensive weapons to Ukrainian allies. In 2015, I visited Ukrainian troops in Dnipro, not far from the Eastern Front. One officer pleaded for Javelin anti-tank missiles, observing that, quote, we don't need to destroy every Russian tank. We only need to destroy one Russian tank. The way he frames it is so, funhouse, mirror. It's ridiculous. He said basically Russia invaded Ukraine and killed 14,000 people. It's very similar to the way the Blob or the Hawks talk about Syria, where it's like Assad killed 500,000 people. That's all you need to know. And so he's saying we need to impose more sanctions, expel more Russian diplomats, pressure the Europeans. He wants to get France and Germany to engage in more economic warfare and threaten sanctions against the Russians. Which is interesting because, as James Carden wrote recently, that piece for Responsible Statecraft, where he talks about how Russia and Germany today, in our time, and actually even historically, in terms of the way they fit into sort of U.S. and NATO policy vis-a-vis Russia, have often been moderating influences, and that in recent times, America has been more inclined to back the sort of the Baltic states and Poland, who are much more hawkish on Russia. And so, and that's obviously that's what he's talking about. He's trying to get France and Germany to act totally against their own interests, working with the Russians. And something for any neocon who's going to talk about World War II and to invoke the idea that we should try and stand in the way of Nord Stream 2 in the name of security and peace, or whatever, is ridiculous. We should be encouraging as much economic interdependence between Russia and Germany and Russia and Europe as possible. And that's what that's what they're doing on their own. The Americans were trying to stop it. But he even says, he goes, as Daniel says here, Cotton's claim that Biden waived these sanctions as a gesture of goodwill to Russia is simply false. He tries to frame it like Biden. He even says his feeble foreign policy towards Russia. And Daniel points out, of course, his policy has been, other than Nord Stream 2, for the most, and of course, extending New Start.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been as hawkish as just about any other administration we've had, under certainly on Trump. Since Trump, I should say, because Trump was arguably worse than Obama. But, it's just he talks about, of course, he references Austin's trip recently to Ukraine and Georgia, where he told them the door is still open to NATO. And, of course, we just sent warships again into the Black Sea. You covered that on on the most recent show. And last month, we flew B-1B bombers again over the Black Sea that were intercepted by Russian fighter jets. They had refueling tanker-like aircraft with them as well, and strategic bombers over the Black Sea. So it's interesting because Nuland was recently in Moscow meeting with Sergei Rabkov, the deputy foreign minister. And they wanted to, as Daniel talks about here, that of course we should be having more diplomatic interaction with Russia, and of course the neocons are saying you should expel more diplomats. And that was a trend that really began more or less under Obama and then took off under Trump. He was setting records for how many diplomats he was kicking out. And it's continued under Biden as well. But apparently Rabkov made an offer to Newland that I read about at antiwar.com, where they essentially offered a reset on diplomatic relations, and it sounds like Newland essentially turned them down. So yeah, so which isn't surprising, but let me see if I can find it. Yeah, Rabkov. This is Dave DeCamp. It's called "Putin Says He Has a Working Stable Relations with Biden." Rabkov said Russia offered a mutual lifting of all diplomatic restrictions, but it appeared the U.S. was not interested. Quote, I cannot say that we have achieved great progress. There is a risk of further sharpening tensions. And I'll just point out that, like, the Russians had to lift sanctions in order for Newland to even make that trip. And it was interesting because things have been extremely tense between America and Russia since Biden came into office, a continuation of the Trump era. And actually, it was interesting because Putin came out and said, in general, in my opinion, President Biden and I have rather stable working relations, he said to TASS, the Russian news agency. He pointed to the fact that Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State, is currently there for talks. Quote, she and her Russian colleagues are discussing our further contacts with President Biden. So we currently have rather constructive relations with the current administration. And this was just in October. And so when Nuland met with the Kremlin Deputy Chief of Staff, Dmitry Kozak, she said, we had a productive discussion with Dmitry Kozak about our shared interests, along with those of Ukraine, France, and Germany, according to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, she said after the meeting. So it's just interesting that as the last month closed out, we started seeing all these renewed aggressions and this, frankly, amateurish propaganda campaign in the media trying to, there's a Russia. Even Ukraine, as you pointed out, they denied this idea that there was a buildup, near their borders, which ordinarily Ukraine you'd think would jump all over that as an opportunity to get more money and arms and anything else. But no, Tom Cotton is demanding that, yeah, just, of course, it's like, I was just listening to Scott Horton talk to James Bradley, and he said they referenced a Jack Keane interview on Fox News where he's hyping up he's going off about how big of a threat China is and how they're going to take over the planet, and we're headed for war. They're going to take Taiwan. And Bill Hemmer is kind of framing it like that. And he says, so what do we do, Jack Keane? And Jack Keane goes, we need to retool. The military needs to retool. So, of course, just more money, of course, is always the answer. These submarines and under the AUKUS deal with Australia, they're not even going to be ready for at least a couple decades. This is always the answer. And Tom Cotton's piece, if you read it, it's nauseating, but it's even amateurish from the perspective of a propagandist. Like I said, he blames everything on Russia, and he goes, they invaded. They occupied the Donbass and Lufthansk, or he says that Donetsk and Lufthansk, the Donbass region. He goes, they've occupied and they've seized Crimea after they invaded. And then a page later, or 2 pages later, he goes, we need, if Russia invades Ukraine, we need to get France and Germany behind us on more sanctions. And he goes, and they'll have to like cut their relations with them because, and he starts saying that the Russians are going to try and cut off their heat since if they control more of their natural gas and all this stuff. So it's just the usual stuff. As Daniel says, Cotton's recommendations are exactly what you would expect. So I don't know if there's more arms shipments that are certainly he's proposing them. And I'm sure maybe we'll get another arms sale. The Biden administration has already moved hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine, including armed patrol boats and things like that. And of course, NATO has been increasing their activity drastically in the Black Sea this year. So. And we've seen, military exercises on Russia's border when they point and they go, Russia put 100,000 troops on its border near Ukraine. This was during the largest U.S., NATO-led NATO exercises almost entirely in Eastern Europe that were the largest exercises since the Cold War on Russia's borders, including, was it Crystal Arrow or one of them? Our friend Pat McFarland has a great piece about this called The Danger of Great Power Competition with Russia and China. And he cites Rick Rozarov in there, who's talking about when one of these exercises, they had German Leopard tanks and I think U.S. Abrams tanks racing each other in Latvia, on Russia's borders. So it's just, the worst kind of provocations you can think of. And so I guess they're just going to continue this. But yeah, so we'll see if it's coming. Certainly, Tom Cotton is working very hard with his editorials in the Wall Street Journal to make sure that we do send more arms to Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, I expect more to come on, this issue and others. I saw this week there's a huge issue they're trying to make out of some migrants traveling through Belarus into the European Union. And it's the most baffling thing. The U.S., which just ran on essentially a policy of opposition to open migration is equivalent to bigotry, and now they're sanctioning Belarus for allowing open migration. It's one of the more crazy things that I've heard. Of course, this time, Connor, they're not migrants; they're being weaponized and all this kind of stuff. That again, had you heard Trump say, you would have called him a racist. But now that the Democrats are in charge, they're allowed to say all this crazy stuff and sanction Belarus. Anyways, Connor, we should wrap up there. It's been absolutely great. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. People, check out the Libertarian Institute. Libertarianinstitute.org is the URL. Support the fund drive. It'll support both me and Connor and the work we're putting out. Keep an eye on the featured article section there. Connor will have something out, I'm sure, sometime relatively soon. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, Connor. And Freeman's Mind 96 on Twitter. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back with more shows later in the week.
Thanks everybody. Thanks, Kyle.